Malcolm du Plessis, what an honor, man, to have you on the Beyond Sunday podcast.
Thanks, David.
Um, really, really excited for this. Love the work that you're doing. So how you doing, man? Things going well?
I've been busy, but I'm really, I'm good of spirit and good of heart. So
Yes,
I'm pleased to report that. Please,
that's
life
very
is
good.
good.
Yeah. Malcolm, I remember, I don't know if you remember this, the first time that we met. I believe this was at a Catalyst conference in Atlanta. And somehow we
Oh,
rubbed shoulders and just started to have a conversation. And I remember at that time you were sort of preparing to launch this idea of common hymnal. And I don't know how many years ago this was, but I just remember being fascinated by that conversation. It brought some understanding to some concepts and some industry realities that I just was not aware of at the time. And I love seeing what you've done, how you've been a voice for the underdog, the outcast, the marginalized, and
thank
been
you,
a
David.
joy to see the work that you're doing, man. And so I'm excited just to talk about that. Um, so Malcolm, let's start with this. When people ask you what you do for a living, how do you answer that question?
I never know. I usually just say I'm the prince of random. Is the it, it's the phrase I came up with to distract from actually having to answer the question. Because what I do know is that I've not structured my life. That sounds too manipulative, but I definitely know that I'm alive for not the things I do for a living. I've done for a living. I definitely know that I found a way in my adult life to earn enough money and have enough flexibility for the random things that happen. I feel like I'm a concierge desk, honestly, which isn't very flattering. And I just feel there's a long line of people in front of me, and I'm saying, second left, sorry, they closed last Tuesday. When yeah. I wouldn't go there. They're a little bit expensive, and I just feel that's what I am. As I've aged, I've become someone that younger people in the world of creativity and art who lost, like I was when I was in my 20s. I had nobody. I was a well, how do I say it? Courageous sounds self-promoting, but I was a daredevil. I did all kinds of crazy things. And then I had no older people that understood the world that I was in, that I could talk to. I had church leaders who could quote scriptures, but they couldn't join the dots between these passages and the particular things that I face. So what I think I'm alive for is to help a generation of young people find their space.
Mm, I love that. And I want to back up a little bit, Malcolm, because for our listeners just to know, and I know this is something you would talk about, but you've been a music executive for decades and, worked with labels and artists from in South Africa all the way to the US. And we could we could rattle off all the impressive names. And we're not going to do that here today.
Thank you.
But you're grateful for that. But just want to give people context for who you are, what you've seen that has sort of shaped what you're doing today. And so I wonder if you could,
Yeah, and just to say, I've mostly, for 95% of my time working in music, I've been like a consultant as opposed to an employee. So,
yeah.
I've definitely been the person on the fringe who executives have trusted to say, to challenge them and
Mm,
say wild stuff, but also know that I'm loyal to them, that I'm not a renegade, that I'm a thought through, moderately intelligent human being who could help them in their space, but also would let them know consistently things that about that space that didn't really line up very well with the Sermon on the Mount. Let's put it that way.
mm. So executives have wanted you to challenge them.
Not all, but some.
Or maybe initially they said, Malcolm, we invite your voice. And then after a while, it's like, okay, we've had enough, huh?
No, the executives that I've worked with, and some of the key ones have passed. They're no longer alive, but they've
Yeah.
known me for a very long time. And interestingly, In my 20s, I built something like Common Himmel in South Africa that was a resistance, praise and protest resistance movement. And I met a lot of the people in Christian music in the 80s. So the
Mm.
relationships, the people that I've worked for know the wildest version of me that was possible. The 26-year-old who was, just fearless. And so they invited me in knowing that. The one people that don't know me and haven't had a journey with me, well, then I'm terrifying.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Malcolm, talk to us about those 20 something years in South Africa. What was it like back then, and what was kind of burning in your soul in terms of like the work that you were doing at that time? Just kind of give us an overview of what you were involved in.
It's hard to do it quickly because it's a long, complicated story, but I'll try my best.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I grew up in South Africa in apartheid. I'm a white kid who did not grow up in a Christian home. My dad was a professional gambler and horse racing, so I was not exposed to. I knew nothing about Christianity. I never heard the words convert, born again, saved, anything until I was nearly 18 years old. So I live in America now where most kids are recovering from their fundamentalist upbringing. I don't have one. I found Jesus, and Jesus was a relief to me. He wasn't a point of laws and pain.
Wow.
And my father was my first convert. And by the age of 23, I was involved with a small team planting a church out of a bigger church that collapsed due to all kinds of problems, as happens, unfortunately, more regularly in church than feels good. And in the second year of that church, I had a moment, a God moment, where I felt intuitively that we were supposed to call the church to fast and pray for our country as an ignorant white person, a young white congregation who have no knowledge of we know that nobody likes us. We know that we just have a very, very propagandized bubble life. And I started my journey through a moment of prayer where I felt God speak to me. And I don't say that regularly. I'm not in the version of Christianity where God's chitter-chattering all day about random things. To me,
Yeah.
the prophets of the Bible had one message: don't follow idols. This is what will happen to you. And every prophet prophesied the same message. Today, we have another culture where God seems to be interested in all kinds of trivial things, but actually the prophetic work has to do with the destiny of the nations of the world. So um, from a
Mm.
very shielded, white, privileged South African, apartheid benefiting upbringing, I slowly entered the world of activism through prayer and fasting, not through reading books, not through listening to left-wing people speak, but through the Holy Spirit tenderizing my heart and me going on a journey. And for the five and a half years about leading up to the release of Nelson Mandela from prison, I did everything wrong. When I look back on it, every single thing I did was clumsy. But I, as a young white person, took the initiative to build a multilingual, multi-ethnic, multicultural community ecosystem of songwriters and musicians. And we wrote songs and fused praise and protest in that season, and ultimately played a role in our march to freedom, in our resistance movement against the powers of white supremacy. And so those 5 years, in many ways, those 5 years feel like 100 years, and the rest of my life feels like a weekend. That's how I often think about it, because there's so much that happened in those 5 years, mostly difficult and not necessarily fun or beautiful, but so purposeful, and they shaped me. So, but I grew up in a system where I was the beneficiary, and I never had to ever had to put myself in other people's shoes.
Yeah.
Our geography was built. In America, you have black community in the inner city and then white people in the suburbs. We had it the other way around. Our country moved all the black people out of the inner city and put them far away so no one could see the lifestyles that they lived in, and put us in the middle and built ring roads around our big cities. And we lived in that, and we never had to face any of that reality. And just literally through prayer and contemplation and a few relationships, I had a journey where I became ultimately, my phone was tapped, my mail was opened often. I'd get letters and it would be taped. my bank statements and stuff. I lived, I was followed. We were people of interest in the movement because I am, and our second record was banned. So there's not many people that made a record that said Jesus is Lord that was banned by a government because the
Wow.
power of bringing young white and black people together was seen as troublesome to the people that needed desperately to keep us apart and suppress one group for the benefit of others.
Wow. Is
Did
that
I
music
answer the
still?
question?
Yeah, no, it's great. Is that music that you released back then, is that still available?
Some of it's online. Um, I hesitate to play it all the time because, it's from the world, the days of We Are the World, and the lyrics compared to what I really treasure today, they were wonderful at the time, and it was something really strong. But I don't know that it dated. It dates beautifully.
Mm,
But yes, it's available. The project we call it Friends First, and the music's around.
amazing. Friends
Um,
first, huh?
uh-huh.
Okay. I'm just right, just in case some of our listeners want to check this out. Unless you don't want them to know, that's fine too. But
Uh, it's the story is more powerful than unless you're listening to the music, because I think there's things that are happening today. Even though I'm telling my story and I'm pleased to tell my story, I'm at the age where I'm not necessarily sure that my story is the point of why I'm alive. I think helping platform a new generation of people's stories is what I feel passionate about. So I'm not
okay.
dismissive about that as much as thinking, no, 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 no. There's a all of that was the learning ground for me
Yeah.
to do something now that hopefully will have ramifications even in other countries than our country.
So Malcolm, I'm curious as to what you're seeing kind of in the church and political landscape today here in America. Are there similarities to what you experienced in South Africa, decades ago? Are there parallels that you're noticing?
I say this with great um, caution and kindness and thoughtfulness, as opposed to just being another voice who's yelling at people.
Yeah.
It's identical.
Hmm.
It's frighteningly identical, and it's easier for it's easy for us to know it because of the nature of the propaganda. My discovery of it, because I traveled to America lots before I lived here, and that team, our project in the '80s, we were signed to an American label. We traveled to America, and so I had a lot of exposure to America. My first visit to America, I stayed for 2 months in the home of a black family, so my lens of America was through Black American culture, but it still seemed infinitely more amazing than apartheid, what we grew up with. But when I moved here, I started to learn America, and I love America, and I'm not an enemy, and but what I found was the propaganda is the same. White people, for the most part, it's ignorance.
Yep.
It's a lack of exposure. I'm talking about myself. I'm not talking at people or yelling at people, but I'm a
Yeah.
I'm a white human being, and I lived in a bubble, and I was protected, and I had a way of processing others until I met others, until I went into their homes, until I had those experiences. And I think that for the most part, white Christianity lives in a bubble,
Yep.
and the ability to actually put yourself in other, like we grew up in a country with 11 languages. So nobody speaks all 11 languages. So you have to learn a certain skill to get by in conversations when you don't really know everything that's happening. And so you mix body language and a couple words that and you figure you still can participate in life even though you're not fully aware. When I use a funny South African or British colony idiom like much of a muchness, or whatever these crazy phrases that I have still in my system, I can see American culture people's eyes glaze because the skill or the necessity to get into other people's shoes is not necessary when you live in such a strong country. The propaganda is identical. And as I've read the history, I've learned that much of the legislation that is uncomfortable for me in America predated South Africa sometimes by 100 years.
Wow.
And that has been an eye opener for me. And so the Christianity lives in a similar bubble to what we had. I did a piece, if you go and look on Common Hymnal site, myself and Bishop Tutu's daughter, Nontombi Tutu, did a spoken piece. It lasts about 10 minutes, and we titled it, I Moved from One South Africa to Another. And we both just tell our stories of the similarities of the experience of both cultures. That's the kind way for me to say it. We live in a season where there's a lot of people yelling, and somehow Christianity has become comfortable with aggression and opinions and all kinds of things, which when you boil down to it, as I said earlier, don't echo anything of the spirit of the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, the ideas that Jesus postulated in the Sermon on the Mount are seen as troublesome in our society. That's unusual. Our Christianity is morphing into something other than it ever was meant to
Yeah.
be.
Well, yeah, there is so much ignorance, and I see that ignorance even in my own heart, in my own life. I think we can stand back as white people in America and we can say, I'm not racist, or my parents were not racist, right? And we can just sort of wash our hands with those statements, but then we don't realize what it's like to sort of live in a position of privilege and what other people have had to experience and walk through in this country. And it's unbelievable whenever you hear the stories.
Mhm.
And so we need to come at it from this place of humility, of we need to walk with people. We need to listen to people, look people in the eye and love them and hear their stories and apologize and repent. You don't see a lot of that going on in America these days.
No, and to me, the key to goodness in the Christian life is curiosity. There's a
Yeah.
reason that Jesus called his followers disciples. They were pupils. He was the teacher and they were learners. And as long as we stay in a learning disposition, I'm not going to go make, like, qualified, empirical decisions about white people, etc. But here's the truth. The Bible doesn't have many white people in it, just a couple Roman soldiers, maybe. And the overwhelming majority of the people who are following Jesus in our world today are women of color. Yet the overwhelming influence in Christianity is white men from the West, and that's awkward. It's a real tricky situation. So we have to just ponder that, be aware of that, and engage as such. If we can be aware of that and embrace it in its beauty, we can engage in this world in a beautiful way. Unfortunately, Europe colonized the overwhelming majority of the world and took a version of the gospel with their travels. And I grew up in one of those colonies. And the consequences of colonization have ripped our world into shreds. The first book is that we think, as far as we know, the first book that was written in the New Testament was the book of Philippians. And the earliest memory is listed in Philippians chapter 2. He did not count equality with God as something to be taken advantage of or leveraged or grasped, it says in the King James, but he took on the form of a servant. And because of that, God has elevated him. Everything about the story of Jesus, it's not about scaling. It's the opposite of scaling. He had already scaled. He was already at the highest place, but he downsized in order to touch real human beings. And somehow in our world, the need to leverage power and to go, and even in the world that, you and I have met in the world of praise and worship, it's the few that resource the many, when everything about the Christian faith is about the many all having a dignified position at the table. I work in songs. I know I've met hundreds of songwriters in my life. There are plenty of good songwriters in the world. There's not just 20. But somehow colonization, even in the church, means that a few people find positions of influence, and then the rest become the beneficiaries of their revelation, their position, their platforms. And that's anti. So colonialism has shaped our world in a way that it's going to be hard to ever escape from fully.
And that's why I'm grateful for what you're doing, Malcolm, is you're approaching it not of this, let's rage against the machine, let's rail against everything, but it's let's find another solution. Let's be
Correct.
active in a different way than just being mad all the time. Because
It's
it's easy to get there. It's
yes.
easy to just like, I hate everybody. I hate everything. And that's the end of it, right? But you're doing something different. So with Common Hymnal, Malcolm, there's a couple phrases that I love
Okay.
that I've heard from you that I see surrounding Common Hymnal. And one of those is a kingdom of priests.
Okay.
And I want you just to talk about that. I know that you've sort of hinted at it already, but when I sat down with you at Catalyst, that was a phrase that I hadn't really heard before. I know it's in the scriptures, but talk about how you view even the music industry or the worship industry in terms of, we are a kingdom of priests. What does that mean to you?
In Exodus chapter 19, when Moses came down from his lofty experience with God and he addressed the Israelites, that's how he identified them. He brought the message from God: "You will be for me a kingdom of priests." In my words, a collaborative community where everybody has a part to play and everybody stands on a level playing field. Not, not a couple, a little while later in the Bible, John the Baptist, he could say 1,000 things about Jesus, but he said one sentence: when he comes, every valley will be raised up. Let me get my hands on the screen. Every mountain and hill will be made low, and we'll stand on a level playing field. Male, female, old, young, intelligent, uneducated, or everybody from every facet will have a voice at the table. And that's the beauty and the tangible sparkle of the Jesus life, is this kingdom of priests where everybody, each and every one of us has a voice. Each and every one of us, where we are on our journey, because we all have sinned and fallen short. There's even a hierarchy in Christianity of which sins are the horrendous sins and which sins are the acceptable sins.
Right.
But all of us have fallen short. We don't, you hear the stories of he was a wonderful man and then he fell from grace. No, no, no. We all start rock bottom. The only way is up. There's no lower than all have sinned. Well, you can't come as a sinner and then become a worse sinner because you suddenly misbehaved. We start at rock bottom, we find our way up, and that rock bottom is that place where we all are on a journey and we followers of Jesus. But there's so many metaphors that we use for God's people. The city on the hill, the bride of Christ. There's all these things, and they're all like these grandiose metaphors which put us under pressure. Anybody that wants to know God or find Jesus under pressure to become something, when actually the metaphor, if you read the story of the New Testament, the metaphor is people who were finding or were found followed Jesus, and they were troublesome. If you read the stories, they weren't fancy people. They were a small kingdom of priests, a group of people who Jesus said, "Come, let's figure it out." And so, to me,
Yep.
in the expression of, if you want to talk about God's people getting together to sing and to worship, it doesn't reflect that spirit. Even the way things have gone in the last 25 years, we have a production culture that's just exploded, and it's way different from the days when I first went to Christian meetings, where someone stood at the front and said, "Anybody got any requests?" And then someone would say, "Number 72." And just all the clumsiness that's surrounded by that. But then if someone needed someone to pray for them, you would pray. But now you can't even pray for people because the music's so darn loud. And
Yeah.
if you haven't cleaned your teeth, best you don't want to really get your face too close to them. And there's just all these dynamics that have made it hierarchical. There's constantly these things which tend towards hierarchy, and yet the beauty of the story of Jesus is all have a place at the table. Even those that we can't stand and think are living in ways or doing things that we can't stand, they still are beloved by Jesus and have a chance to journey with him and find their dignity. But
I talk to a lot of worship leaders, right, with the work that I do, and this theme, this topic is just really resonant. I feel like a lot of people right now are disillusioned, disoriented, just with kind of the current state of things? Like, why only a few movements are sort of have the corner on what everybody is saying and
Yes.
singing, sort of the celebrity worship of music, and we're all involved in it. But I think right now we're sort of like, how did we get here, and is this okay? What should we do? How do we move on from this, or what's the best path forward? Like, what would you say, Malcolm, just to those artists and worship leaders from mega churches to small churches that are sort of feeling this angst, this disillusionment and disorientation kind of with the current state of worship in the church and the worship industry? What would you say to them?
I'm going to give a funny first response. It was 1987. I read this verse, Ecclesiastes 4, verses 1. And I interpreted it through the context of South African racism, apartheid. I looked and I saw all the oppressed, all the oppression that took place under the sun. I looked and I saw the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. And then I looked and I saw their oppressors, plural, and they had no one to comfort them. And in that moment, I realized that both those who've been rejected or disenfranchised and those who've managed to find positions of power live with a similar loneliness and need comfort. So
Yeah.
I'll preamble what I'm going to say in that those that have benefited and have learned how to leverage their brands for influencing Christianity are God's people. They're not evil people. They, often because I know, several of them, and we've
Sure.
talked, and often when I'm because I've never been involved in the big church phenomenon as a choice in life. I don't think Christianity was meant to scale. I think the moment we scale is when we lose the plot. But I've spoken to many of them, and their argument is, we're good people. And the same response is, I know that, but you can be a good person with a relatively bad idea.
Wow.
And so I would love to say to those that are struggling, who are at the point of realizing, oh, I'm never going to get in. This is a club, and I'm not going to make it. And those people who have got positions of power are God's people. And I, ironically, although I'm on the fringe with the waifs and the strays and the disenfranchised, I also have a number of those relationships, and I serve them too. Because how they manage their power or their privilege is not, that's for them to sort out. But those are not necessarily evil, but the idea is a relatively bad idea, and it's confused, and it's set Christianity on a really bad path. I don't think it was ever, it's not my thoughts, it's just not God's intention. So the idea that 5, 6, or 7 churches or movements can be like, people don't have to wake up and think, should I write a new song because of the things that are happening in my life, in my world, in my community? They just go as a reference, worship leaders, every Monday, and look up what their favorite personalities are doing and just reproduce them. And Christianity has become a Xerox machine. It's very devoid of original thought. And the word isomorphism is a biological, chemical, and mathematical term that talks about two sets that involuntarily become the same thing. And that's what's just happened. If you listen to the playlists in the genre, you could swear it was the same band. You go outside of Christianity, and music just touches it's quirky. There's all kinds of stuff that happens. But you enter the world of let's honor God, and it's the same thing. And even the subject matter is the same thing. You can remember, 25 years ago when Passion started. I mentioned this because I mentioned the movement because it's a positive. And Charlie Hall wrote, "Give us clean hands and a pure heart," and it was in the
Yep.
top 10, and everybody sang it. Could you
Yeah.
imagine a song going viral in America today that says, give me clean hands and a pure heart"? Go look at the top 100 songs that are reported. That's not going to make it big. But the things that make
Wow.
it big are wonder, nature. There's so all the songs have just become a small subset, but there's a huge life, and there's things that happen in our lives. So it's not only that a few people are dictating the songs, but the subject matter is reduced. Everything is just reduced to what's commercially viable, what scales, what works. And if you don't do that, you would be seen as, you would feel that you were lesser, and yet there's an incredible dignity to those who are courageous and take risks and are even if they're not blazing a trail, would love to just innovate. Everything about the story of Jesus, everything about the story of Jesus has echoes the idea, his mercies are new every morning. Just if you want to know the personality and the character and the intentions and the style of God, look at creation. And it's all over the map. And people will travel the world to go to the most driest, hottest deserts and be stupefied and take photographs and produce coffee table books and all that kind of stuff because of the diversity of creation. And yet we've just reduced, and we all are impoverished for it. I don't know if I addressed the question.
agree.
I don't know. I don't even know if that's what you were.
No, it's beautiful. I mean, it kind of leads us into another phrase that you use a lot, Malcolm, and that's the spiritual underground. So we've kind of hit on the overground a little bit, like we know what that is. But talk about the spiritual underground. I mean, these are the people that you're working with, that you're platforming, and you're, you know, building a relationship with. What is the spiritual underground?
Let me say it once again. Let me preface by saying I use the words overground a lot, but I don't use it with a sting. There is an infrastructure that has been established all over the world, organizations, buildings, statements of faith, all these things that have existed, which is the face of the known Christianity to the world. But the origins of the faith are on the fringes. Jesus was on the fringe. John the Baptist was on the fringe. The story of Jesus isn't a systemic story. It's a story of those that was slightly alienated and finding a way. Every single time Jesus became popular and the crowds grew big, he didn't plan a tour, and upgrade his booking agent, but he said, "No, come with me here."
Wow.
And so the underground for me, because people, when I use that word, people say, "Well, won't you become the overground?" As if to catch me out all the time. And it's like, I don't know that I'm not necessarily fighting the systems. I don't believe in institutions. I don't think that institutionalization is part of the plan of God. Let me put it that way. It's freezing cold today. That's why I've got this thing on.
No, you're good. It's cold here too.
But if I go outside today with my swim trunks on, I'm going to get sick. I have to respect the seasons that change, and it's built into the system. And the seasons change and everything to do with the world. You do not build the institution of surfing when you're at a glacier. You have to. There's other stuff that you do when you're in the cold. So to me, the underground isn't I'm rebelling against this and these people don't go to church or any of that stuff. It's just like that space in this world where innovation is treasured. That space in this world where just being a carbon copy doesn't feel like being alive, doesn't feel like being a human being. That space in the world where the ideas, when things have been institutionalized to the point that it's just become repetitive and boring and commercial, and people are saying, no, who is Jesus? What is it? And that place of curiosity, it's that space. And so some of the people that are in the ecosystem that I sort of instigated, although I'm working my way out, because if I truly believe in the message of John the Baptist, I can't be the center of it. And I've helped build something as an elderly person with a whole bunch of youngsters, and with the goal of building BIPOC equity, basically a music business that's owned by a whole bunch of people with no white fingerprints in it. And it's a delicate
Beautiful.
journey. But so but so some of the people in the ecosystem around Common Hymnal are in, big, powerful churches, but who they are as individuals is that they treasure the community, they know the intentions, and they love what they're involved with in some way. But there's this insatiable curiosity, and there's these things that are not happening there that need to be taken care of. And they've found a community and a place of gathering here where we can actually explore and ask real questions and not be in trouble and not get our hands slapped and not have to just say catchphrases and live a life of cliches. We live a life of curiosity and adventure. And then
Mm.
there's many who are not in the systems and would be bored in the systems, but are not enemies of the systems and have
Yeah.
vital relationships. But it's that space of it's that space where innovation can still happen.
Mm-hmm.
Let me say this. What is idolatry? Idolatry is when we take our attention from the originator, the creator, the one who originated everything, and put the attention on the domino effect of the creator. And when we become consumed with the consequences of the originator as opposed to the origination, there's something about personal integrity that has to do with valuing original thought, innovation. The underground is where people know that, first of all, we do not worship God because he's a redeemer. We worship first because he's a creator, because there's no redemption if there wasn't creation in the beginning. And so
Mm-hmm.
the
Beautiful.
underground to me is the place of where creativity and innovation are really, really valued.
Mm.
I don't know if that was too abstract, but
No, it's beautiful.
okay.
Malcolm, what name some artists for us that are in the common hymnal family? And it's probably hard to name all of them, but I would just love some of our listeners to know their names and be able to look up their music and their ministry, even after listening to this podcast. What are some of the folks that your mind is being blown by right now?
We don't, there's not many of the people in our world who've got solo careers that have made it. That's why I've gathered them, because they
Yeah,
just haven't,
that's okay.
they haven't built that. But so let me mention three or four. Praise Page was born in Nigeria. She moved here when she was 10 years old. I found her when I met her. All I knew about her is that she won a national poetry competition as a teenager, and I loved the poem. And
Mm,
invited her because of mutual relationships into something that we were doing. I did not know that she was the best thing I'd ever heard in my life. I just did not know that. I had no clue, but I knew she was good with words, and lyrics are important in the subculture of common hymnal.
yeah.
So Praise is she's worked for Vice Media for years. She's a filmmaker, independent filmmaker. She's, as far as I understand, her job for Vice was directing content about Black women in America. Um, she lives in New York. Her and her husband have a place in Brooklyn, and they've got a little house in the Catskills up in New York State. And she's just an exceedingly interesting person. She's singing the lead vocal on the song "Be Love" that we released last Friday. On the other end of the spectrum, you have James Pack. James Pack is an Asian American Korean. He has released his own product. Praise hasn't released anything, and we hope to rectify that in
Yeah.
this year.
Good.
James has released his own product under the name James Pack, Paek, and he has several million streams, and he's done really decently, and he's uber talented, and he's a courageous voice in the Asian American community, and has initiated a project called Homecoming. And Homecoming is just Asian American community gathering other Asian Americans to write songs out of the experience of Asian American community who have often felt very invisible because other, people groups, Black culture, have got a musical identity. There's just Latin culture where Asian culture has often felt sidelined. And so James has built
Yep.
something. And if you go look up Homecoming and, their song, Yahweh Holy, we were able to get it into the hands of Gabriela Hoshep, who's the biggest artist in the Christian world in praise and worship from Brazil. She has a bigger platform than anybody. And on her last record, she recorded a song, and it felt like a total anti-colonial thing to do, to have this Brazilian record the song of the Asian Americans. And it's just beautiful. And that's
Amazing.
James's journey. Nabil Ince, who goes by the name So Chill, Seaux, Chill. I met 5-6 years ago. And all I heard was the beats that he made in his bedroom, and I just loved them. And he's
Amazing.
become a consummate record producer. He hasn't been focusing on his own projects, but he did a project about 18 months ago. It came out, I don't remember, by the name of called Deep Currents. And he studied the music of 5 Black neighborhoods in Indianapolis and documented the story of those people. And we're working on trying to get that remixed and out, because it's an incredible project. He hasn't been releasing a whole lot as So Chill. I think he's going to do some this year, but he's a cornerstone producer in our world. Tommy Sims, who's the lead singer of Be Love, is a consummate person in American music. Who's, if you don't know his name, you look him up. I won't brag on all his credentials, but Tommy is someone who found us a year ago and didn't actually fit the demographic, because he's an exceedingly successful and exceedingly accomplished person. And I've gathered people who had potential and talent, but hadn't really made anything of their careers. Tommy has,
Right.
but because of his own journey, he found a home here. And so the marriage of Tommy and Nabil as a production team has been one of the highlights of the last 12 months of my life, just watching it. It's who could have constructed it? I could never have dreamed it up. That's why it's random. There's Jalen CUI is in Detroit, is a cornerstone of the younger Detroit music community. He doesn't necessarily have a vision to release under his own name. That's just not what he's wired to do. He's found a home in our world, and he's a vital person in this world, and was the anchor person who wrote the song Be Love. Jalen, and the next song
Wow.
we released called God Will Prevail. He's a very gifted songwriter and a very gifted musician. And so he is the anchor to our little ecosystem that we have in Detroit, which is one of the delights of the project. Bianca Johnson's one of the people in Detroit. Nikki Hogan is in Los Angeles, and she is a very vibrant, vivacious, life-filled Latina. And her and her sister Genesis have worked in the Latin world forever, and she comes amongst us, and she brings just, as I said, vitality. Is that enough? I can just
Oh, it's
carry on.
beautiful. No, it's great. I just want to give our listeners some
Thank you.
and they'll go check out Common Hymnal, but I want them to know specific names of people they can support and they can listen to their art.
If you go to our website, and wherever there's a song at the bottom of the page, there's other songs by those people, so you can follow the rabbit trail and journey with the creativity of the different contributors.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll link all that up in the show notes.
So,
Malcolm, I want you to expound a little bit upon. So, when we started this conversation, we talked about sort of the ignorance of white America. And I want you to talk about that as it relates to the music industry, because many of us probably don't know about any sort of racist activity or racist structures within the music industry, or how that's even sort of crept into the worship industry or local church ministry. But I just want you to kind of bring some context, some awareness to some of those racist structures and how it affects maybe some of the people you're working with, or how it's affecting us in ways that we don't even see right now. Can you talk about that?
that's the most uncomfortable thing for me to talk about, because it's getting too close to home, but I'll try. Let me see how I can say things. I'll say this: what I discovered when I had to learn this as a transplant from another country to this country. that an overwhelming majority of Black music ventures in America are owned by white people. That's just an interesting fact. How it's never occurred to me that uh, Black radio stations in Christian, that play gospel music would be owned by white people. I never thought. I never imagined such a thing. I thought, you're joking.
Yeah.
Wherever white people are, they find themselves in a position of leadership, and they feel comfortable with that. Um, the obvious one is anybody that's listening, you'll be able to feel in my voice that I don't really want to talk about it a lot because I want to do whatever I can to do something fresh, as you identified earlier. But George Floyd was murdered in 2020, and about 10 of us wrote a document, a manifesto, and sent it around and try to get people to buy into it. And the manifesto, which is on our site, basically prophesied what's happened. Um, we had a terrible thing happen. We had an uprising, and a lot of people became suddenly aware, oh, things are not great in America.
Hmm.
But the only lasting impact of it has been the diversification of the people on the stage at churches in America. If you predate George Floyd's murder and go look at all the music videos, and you look at all the music videos after George Floyd, it's night and day. The trouble is that there's more white churches than churches of other cultures, and generally they have more finances. So there's a generation of young Black, Asian, and Latin guys and girls that found employment in a big mega church. And
Yep.
I say that use the word decorations. I just don't want there to be a sting to it because if I just become like yelling about these issues, people are just going to react. But actually, what we're talking about is golden information for a white person who's following Jesus and wants to live the Jesus way. And
Yep.
and all that's happened is Black and people of color, Black bodies and people of color bodies have decorated the stages of white churches, but the issues that are important to other people have not been absorbed into the platforms. You'll never hear the issues being discussed. And I'm not going to go into all of it. I have access to a lot of information because I've worked in that world, but it's I don't know how to say it, just trust me, it's not good. And
Yeah.
but the main symptom of it is we've merely we've merely just embellished out the look of our platforms, but haven't actually absorbed the real issues. Because if we had, we'd be hearing about them. Because when a parent loses a child, when tragedy happens in the world, any kind of situation, it changes people's lives, and they become consumed with the issues of a parent who loses a child that goes missing. They generally will spend the rest of their lives trying to find a place to help other parents who lose their children. There's things that
Right.
happen that change your life when you go through hardship. That hasn't happened in white Christianity in America. And so what you have now is a generation of young Black and people of color who become part of these platforms. And then after a few years, they suddenly realize when they bring their full self, when they ask the important questions and they get put in perspective, eventually they're finding their way out. And so there's a certain pain. The tragedy is not that they're going to be mad with all these people that didn't really see them, but they're going to question themselves. I feel like we're losing a generation of people of color, young people of color who've found their way into these platforms and then checked out, and they live with a regret. Well, why did you
Wow.
do that? And then self-doubt wastes valuable years of significant leaders. I'm from
Yep.
Africa, and
So well said.
I'll say this about Black culture because I'm from Africa. The ambassadorial diplomatic spirit of people who've had a harder life, or from the third world, or Black culture, it's unbelievable. It's just I've lived in I've had the privilege for 40 years of being deeply involved in Black culture, and often being accepted, not as the kind white person there, but just being welcomed in. And so I've got a bird's eye view of what happens when white people are not in the room. Just like I've had a bird's eye view of what happens in the white rooms when other people of color are not in the room, and it's not always good.
Mhm.
And so that gift of leadership, and we've not felt it in America in huge ways in the last years, and yet we will richly benefit from it. So I'm the elderly white gentleman who wants to tell every white person I know, bury yourself in other cultures because you will benefit and you will
Yes.
be enriched and you will understand how that it's not only in recent years that white people have copied musical ideas. It's not only Elvis Presley that that's stole body movements and styles. It's everywhere, and there's just something. It'd be something so amazing if we don't just benefit from the innovation of other cultures, but actually allow the leaders in these cultures influence in our own lives, because we will richly benefit.
Yep.
I have been the beneficiary of the genius and the wonder of other cultures.
Well, it's interesting, Malcolm. It's like our attempts at diversity have benefited us
Correct.
more than it has benefited African Americans
Yes.
or, other cultures, right? It's sort of like we have these token people to show that we are diverse, but we have not celebrated who they are. We have not celebrated their culture. We have not celebrated their gift. And as you're talking, I'm just like, whew, like, Lord, help us to repent and help us, um, not necessarily this large scale revolution, but in small pockets of like what you're doing with Common Hymnal in different local churches.
Mm-hmm.
Let's change. Like that's where it's going to happen. It's not going to come through legislation. It's going to come through people listening to this podcast who feel that ache and say, "Hey, we're not just going to sit back and allow this to happen, but we're gonna join what God's doing and celebrating other cultures."
One
Um,
word, one caveat, also legislation, by the way,
yeah,
because
both
all the
and
all the white people that don't want to talk about racism and admit the stuff that's going on, they will talk all day long about issues that they feel are important, like abortion, and want it
yep,
legislated. That's political. But as soon as someone says racism, they say, we don't want to go to politics. No, no, no.
you can't do that.
If you read Psalm 2 and you read the prophetic psalm about Jesus, the inheritance of Jesus is the ethnicities of the world. You
Yep,
cannot you cannot embrace the Great Commission and go to ethnos. It's not individuals. There's nothing in the New Testament that suggests personal one-on-one discipleship, but they go into all nations and all ethnicities and teach ethnicities in the plural. And the presumption was that we would go in the way of Jesus from the bottom up, in the way of the Sermon on the Mount, but we went top down. There's just something about the putting of racism in the category of politics where it's actually inextricably intertwined with the Great Commission. How you
yep,
embrace cultures and how you embrace the nations of the world. We're in a situation in our country where the rhetoric about other cultures is so inflammatory. And yet, what were the tithes for? It was for the widows, the orphans, and the aliens. And there's just something about the historicity of our faith which has to do with the impoverished and those and the others. And yet we now have a version of Christianity where the others are the thing that we're protecting ourselves from. And that's why Christian nationalism has all of a sudden been branded and discovered in America. I grew up with Christian nationalism. The party that controlled South Africa was the Nationalist Party. It was the Dutch Reformed Church's version of the Bible. And I grew up in that, but we're only discovering it here in recent years. But it's actually been pervasive for for generations.
mm,
So yes, when something happens that affects someone, we do take the most powerful medium is one-on-one, absolutely. But we also have to be interested in legislation to protect. And that's where people of color, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in our churches struggle, because when it comes to legislation is being passed all the time that is hurtful and frightening to people. And then we say, well, we don't do politics. Well, we have to be concerned about it. So that's my most radical thing I'm going to say today, because I know that's the point where white people think, oh, he's political.
Yeah, he's woke. No, it's so good though, because we can't pick and choose what's important or what to care about, right? Because the Great Commission, the life of Jesus, kind of shows us what's important, and that we just can't turn a blind eye to it.
Basically, there are hundreds of examples in recent history and in history of America of reparations, of things going wrong and the government stepping in to make things right because people have lost. My sister and brother-in-law live 4 houses from where the fires in Altadena, 4 houses from where the fires reached. And most of Altadena was a historic Black community, and there's generations of where Black wealth was, where people were allowed to take loans and own property that's just been obliterated overnight. It's a tragedy, but the bigger tragedy is, after hundreds of years of slavery, the idea that people could get their 40 acres and a mule was withheld from Black people. And now if you say the word reparations, it's politics. Zacchaeus in that tree, and he dealt with, his misuse of funds. He went and gave people 4 times what he'd stolen from them. The idea of restitution is an extremely Jesus thing. But if you mention it in America, it's like, oh, you are left wing. And it's like, no, this is Jesus. It's exceedingly Jesus. It's thoroughly Jesus.
So thought-provoking. Malcolm, we probably could do a 6-hour podcast and just keep going. And maybe we'll do a round 2 sometime. But I want to let you go, respect your time. But last thing, talk about, and you hinted at it with your song that you just released, Be Love.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about this song and this partnership with the King Center. Just very fitting how this is released, Martin Luther King Day, the inauguration. I just can't think of a more fitting song for these times and this moment. Talk about the song, how it came to be.
Bonita Hampton-Smith from the King Center called me, I think it was December 2023, and she'd found Common Hymnal and said, I love what you're doing in infusing justice ideas into songs. We don't have a lot of that, which is the sad thing I've learned. I'll do a quick rabbit trail. I'll be back with you in a second. I grew up in South Africa, where music was intrinsically intertwined with our pursuit of justice. And we wouldn't have had a movement that would have brought change in South Africa if it
Praise
wasn't
and
for music.
protest
Everywhere in our society. And I thought that America had that too, because I knew the activity of the 60s, growing up in the 60s and 70s. And it was only when I moved here, I figured, well, maybe it's not mainstream, but there have to be lots of pockets of it in small places. And I searched, and I'm a pretty good detective, without even the internet. I like researching and stuff. And I've researched and concluded there's an excessive shortage of this stuff. So the King Center recognized that, found our music, and said, could we do some things? So we went and sat down together. I forget what month it was last year. And Bonita said, how about, we've got 2 things that are very important for us. How about you consider writing 2 songs, one titled Be Love. We have a Be Love movement, and we're encouraging people to be involved in justice actively, but always from a love motivation. And so she said, would you write that song? And would you write another one titled The Beloved Community, which is the phrase that MLK embraced for, the benevolent, socially aware community. And so we said yes. And we gathered some people together shortly afterwards, and we wrote a number of songs, but we wrote those 2 songs and then presented them to them. And they responded positively to both. The idea of writing a song called Be Love felt a bit awkward. It felt like it could come out cheesy, because but I don't know how it happened, but the end result It's certainly not cheesy. And it just really works. I think it's the
Oh,
phrase,
it's
will
beautiful.
we be loved? There's just something about it that, once again, it provokes the curiosity. So we did
Yep.
that, and then we were planning on recording it and releasing it for the Be Love Day, which is in July. But then when we found out that MLK Day and the inauguration was the same day, it was like, oh, okay, these are two different messages. And I'll leave it there. And I think we need this. We need something for this message. Let's use this day to trigger the message. So we released the song the Friday, and then on the Friday and then Saturday, we were able to perform it at the Dr. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community awards, in which I think
Oh,
about 10 or 11 different individuals and entities were honored for their work in justice. And it was very inspiring to listen to all the various people. And then we were able to perform the song then. And it was a privilege for Dr. Bernice King posted and joined us. And it's only the beginning of a journey. It's a warm relational partnership where we will find different ways to communicate this message so we can keep this love motivation, which we're in short supply of in our society. And uh, yeah, so generally, we do not, Common Hymnal, we do not pursue success in CCLI and church music. We're not driven by trying to monetize church. And so we don't necessarily we're not writing songs. When we write a worship song, it's because it pops out. We're not in the business of
yeah.
monetizing the praise and worship. But this song feels like one of those songs that could be embraced by the church. Because as I said, the subject matter is reduced. Back in the day, we had songs like I Love You with the Love of the Lord, We Are One in the Spirit, all the songs for the 70s.
Yes.
And, and
We
now
need that again.
we don't have it.
We
And
don't.
so secretly, my hope is that a whole bunch of these influential white churches will embrace this and when we sing the phrase, for a justice long delayed is a justice far too late, MLK's words, when they hear those words, hopefully it will start a journey and a curiosity in their hearts, because that's what happened to me. So I'm thrilled. 40 years
Yeah.
ago, I started my journey of socially conscious music in South Africa, and I felt, it's a long story, but I felt God was calling me to America, that South Africa would change. And I announced it to my church. I said, our country's going to change in 1990. And Nelson Mandela was released from prison in February of that year. And I made my way here, and I've lived here. And now 40 years later, um, we're partnering with the King Center and are spreading this. And it feels very heartwarming, appropriate, beautiful. It's tenderized all of us. It's a beautiful group of people, and we feel like we're partnering with a legacy initiative, and the hope is that the song will trigger a whole bunch of people to go visit the King Center site, look up Be Love Day, and find ways to reflect that spirit in
Yep.
this day of Christianity. That's the hope. And it's not propaganda. It's not a big campaign. We're not trying to,
Yeah.
as I said, I don't want to scale but everything. So I don't want to suddenly like go on a massive advertising campaign. But it would be beautiful if
Right.
what's happened in our lives, where songs have actually triggered a domino effect, that would happen in America. And
And I just want to say this. I want to say
you,
this to our listeners. Malcolm didn't reach out to me saying, "Hey, can I get on your podcast so that I can promote this song?" Malcolm was pretty reluctant to even do this podcast because he's got a behind the scenes guy. So I pushed for it, and really glad that we're doing this, because I really believe in what you're doing, Malcolm, and I believe in this song. So many conversations I'm having about worship today are along this topic of we're not singing enough kinds of songs, right? The monetization of worship has sort of pigeonholed us into a certain kind of song that sells and spreads, but it's to the detriment of our theology and a detriment to our souls when we don't allow ourselves to express other themes. And so my prayer is a song like this could be sung in churches all over the country, not for the sake of this, taking over the world, but just that we need to sing this. Like, we need this kind of stuff.
uh,
And so I'm grateful grateful, Malcolm, that you've just everything that you're doing. It's very inspiring. Thank you.
And my contribution to you, if I'm allowed to have a moment, is thank you. I checked with my team because I'm not really looking to be a spokesperson for anything, to be honest. I was when I was 25, but I'm 65. That season came and went. But I called a few of our crew, and they said, "You got to do it. You got to do it." I said, "Okay, we got to do it."
Yeah.
But I've watched some of the, because we've known each other for a while. But I don't watch all these things. But I've watched and seen the things you've done, and what you're doing is valiant and beautiful. And my hope for you and to the people, I don't know if this is 5 people listening or 1,000 people or 100,000, but my hope is that there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 young guys and girls who are watching your courage and who are currently undefined, have not found their groove in their life, that are watching you and thinking, man, I feel I can do something. Because if the spirit of what you're doing can be reproduced, we need hundreds of these. Because it's not impossible for us to recover the beauty of Christianity in America. It's not necessary for Christianity to be something that feels lost and that everybody's always evaluating. It's possible for the message of Jesus to be beautiful again.
Yes.
And there's something about what you've done as I've watched it. It's like, David, this is good. and so I just want to say kind word to you, but I also want to say to some of the young people that are, old people. Why am I focusing on the young people? Some of the people that are your listeners who are sitting there and thinking, who've got unshaped ideas that maybe as they watch you can think, I'm going to do something too. And because if these dominoes start to fall, we have a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah. Beautiful. Malcolm, this has been such a treat. Thank you. For any of our listeners, I know you didn't ask to do this, but if any of our listeners kind of want to partner with Common Hymnal or just want to kind of get involved in some way, what's the best way for them to do that?
Visit the website, go to the Instagram, follow us. We're not involved in, this is just the facts on the table. We are not pursuing the commercial route. So the chances of what we do going viral and becoming big money making, it's probably not inevitable. We hope that we can find dignity and become part of the zeitgeist of the culture. But if people would, go and join our Patreon or something and give us a couple bucks a month or stuff like that. I mean, that kind of stuff just, keeps us going because, stuff like that. But mostly just reaching out, that you can text us on the site, send us stuff. For the most part, there's a certain culture that's developed in our project, and we know what that is. There's a certain genre that is church music in the world. We don't need another one of those. It's been taken care of adequately. So we're not the enemies of that. That's just thoroughly taken care of. So if people send us songs that just sound like church, as it currently is, we don't really know what to do. But if there's innovators, particularly people of color who are innovating and don't have a place and want to send it or just communicate with us, we do our best to communicate and respond. And we're not looking for everybody to necessarily, once again, our hope would be that what we do triggers creativity in other people and people become allies and listen to our music and stuff, not because they're fans, but because they just think, yeah, absolutely, and I'm going to do it too. And then if we had thousands and thousands of these kinds of initiatives in our world today, as I said, there's hope for the future.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I just want to say this too, who you are, to our listeners, who you are is beautiful. Don't feel like you have to conform to a certain sound or structure or production to sort of fit in. Your voice, your sound, your art. For all of our listeners, you can take courage in that who you are is who God made you, and it is beautiful, and the world needs more of it. They don't need you to conform to the system and the structure. They need you to stand out and be who God's made you to be. So,
You might not
anyway, Malcolm,
make a lot of money, but you might make a whole bunch of bring a bunch of richness in this world.
absolutely, absolutely. And hopefully some of the money follows for you too. That's amazing. Malcolm, thank you so much for your time today, man. You're a legend. So thank you.
Thanks, David.